Nowadays, film critics no longer have the same impact on the industry that they had back in the 1970s and 1980s. Many believe that the golden era of criticism ended in the late 2000s. With the rise of social media, anyone could instantly access hundreds of opinions about an upcoming or newly released film. That shift greatly reduced the demand for professional critics, and now people often just recycle the same negative comments whenever critics' scores are mentioned. Still, in controversial cases, people sometimes lean on critics' opinions to support their arguments. So today, let's talk about professional critics and the role they've played in the film industry. Throughout most of the 20th century, critics were an important part of the business. Back then, audiences could only learn about upcoming films through newspapers and magazines, or, if they were lucky, by catching a trailer at the theater. Most people wanted to know at least something about a movie before deciding to see it. That's where reviews came in. In those days, films could stay in theaters for months or even years, which meant you couldn't just ask your neighbor if a movie was worth it. Chances were they hadn't seen it either. As a result, people turned to publications like The New Yorker or The Empire to read what the critics had to say. The main problem with critics, though, was that they were still just ordinary people, with personal likes and dislikes. They had their favorites and actors or directors they couldn't stand. On top of that, younger reviewers often idolized the big-name critics and followed their lead. If a famous critic slammed a film because of a personal bias, many lesser-known reviewers piled on, assuming the master must know best. A classic example is Pauline Kael, one of the most respected American critics. She couldn't stand Clint Eastwood, dismissing him as talentless and claiming all his characters were just stereotypical killers and psychopaths. Unsurprisingly, she gave nearly all of Eastwood's movies abysmal ratings. Because Kael had so much influence, other critics followed suit. But Clint's popularity with audiences meant critics' negativity barely touched him. For fans, it was simple. A new Eastwood movie hit theaters, they went to see it. That's also why a star's face on a poster once meant far more than it does today. Without a big name, critics could completely sink a film. Some even believe Pauline Kael was the reason director David Lean left the industry. The man behind Lawrence of Arabia and The Bridge on the River Kwai faced her harshest criticisms with Ryan's Daughter in 1970. After her takedown, countless other critics joined in, and the film completely flopped. It didn't even reach American theaters. Another issue was critics' age. Tastes change over time, and nostalgia is powerful. A 65-year-old man was never going to appreciate Transformers or Demolition Man. But does that make those movies bad? When Pauline Kael, at 60, watched Star Wars, she naturally didn't care for all the pew-pew laser battles. Yet the film was saved by groundbreaking technical achievements and the buzz of word of mouth. Today, A New Hope is hailed as a classic, but on release, critics weren't so sure. By the time she was 65, Kael went after Blade Runner, and this time her review actually helped sink it. Critics piled on, audiences stayed away, and Ridley Scott walked away furious. After reading Kael's review, he declared he'd never again bother with what critics had to say. You almost wonder, if Kael had watched Bloodsport or Tango and Cash at 70, how would she have rated Van Damme, the master of spinning kicks? Maybe Clint Eastwood would have stopped being her least favorite actor. The most famous critic of them all, though, was Roger Ebert. Hollywood studios desperately wanted his approval, and the rest of the critical world took cues from him. Careful never to praise a film he trashed. Ironically, Pauline Kael had been Ebert's role model. Still, he often said he tried to judge films differently. Instead of asking whether a movie was simply good or bad, he focused on whether it worked for the audience it was intended for. According to Roger Ebert, Van Damme's films just didn't appeal to audiences. The only one he considered even halfway decent was Sudden Death. As for Cyborg, he called it one of the worst movies in cinema history, complaining it had too many fascists, busty women, and cheap sets. Cheap sets in a film that cost under $500,000? Who would have guessed? Ebert also perfectly illustrates how critics love to change their minds. He often revised his reviews years after a film's release, usually when it unexpectedly became a cult classic. For example, when The Godfather Part 2 premiered, he rated it about the same as one of Van Damme's movies. Years later, he placed it among the greatest films of all time. His usual explanation was simple. People's tastes change over time. And sure, that's true. We all reconsider our opinions now and then. But unlike a critic, the average moviegoer's personal opinion had zero impact on the box office, so they never carried the same responsibility. Take Stargate, for instance. Many believe its lukewarm box office numbers were partly because Ebert and other critics savaged it. He labeled it one of the worst movies ever made, right alongside Constantine, which he and his followers also tore apart. In other words, Ebert thought Cyborg, Stargate, and Constantine belonged in the same league as baby geniuses. And yes, that really was his opinion. But audiences clearly disagreed. Baby Geniuses scores a pitiful 2.6, while Stargate sits at a solid 7. Or look at Arnold Schwarzenegger. In Ebert's eyes, Arnold's best film was Junior, with only Terminator 2 coming close. Meanwhile, he lumped Collateral Damage, Around the World in 80 Days, and The Sixth Day on the same level as Predator and True Lies. And this from a man who claimed he judged films by audience enjoyment rather than quality. Apparently, Junior brought more joy than Predator or True Lies. He also had a soft spot for young Nicolas Cage. Because of that, he believed movies like It Could Happen to You, Guarding Tess, and Honeymoon in Vegas were better than any Schwarzenegger film. On the flip side, he never seemed to hate Kevin Costner, even when the rest of the world did. For Ebert, any Costner movie automatically ranked above most others, except for The Postman, which he almost rated as low as Cyborg. Another big name worth mentioning is Peter Travers. Like a true professional critic, he absolutely despised Michael Bay. And just like Ebert, he considered Armageddon and Bad Boys to be among the worst films in Hollywood history. Unsurprisingly, most critics followed his lead and lined up to trash Bay's work. Back in the day, critics really mattered. Studios courted them, hoping for good press. Today, it's the other way around. Critics tread carefully, terrified of losing access to early screenings or getting banned from promotional events where they'd otherwise enjoy fancy food, free swag, and face time with stars and directors. There's also the global trend you can't ignore. A bad review of a major studio release might cost a critic some perks, but a negative take on a socially relevant film could get them labeled racist, sexist, or worse. That could kill their career. Which is why, in recent years, critics' scores so often soar higher than the audience's, a reversal of how things used to be. For example, in 2018, Steve McQueen, director of 12 Years a Slave, released Widows. Critics immediately showered it with praise, but audiences, too uneducated apparently to appreciate its brilliance, rated it like a mid-tier Van Damme flick. 6.8 on IMDb compared to critics' glowing 8.4. The film's level of naivete was so high, it's hard to imagine what the pros actually saw in it. Or take 2016's Ghostbusters. Critics gave it a generous 74% positive score, but the audience wasn't having it. Sure, maybe viewers underrated it a little, feeling like their childhoods had been tampered with, but that doesn't excuse the critics' over-the-top praise. If the exact same movie with male leads had been directed by Michael Bay, no critic would have scored it above a 3. And that's why professional critics just don't matter anymore. In the past, their reviews were skewed by human biases, which at least made sense. But today, most of them are too afraid to voice a real opinion, terrified of offending the wrong people, especially if the film highlights anyone considered different. What's left is a watered-down, politically correct take where the critic's actual voice is nowhere to be found. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned.